Welcome to the DNA Talks podcast, where we take on the mission of unlocking the code of your genetics. This season is all about you, upgrading your health, not just on the surface, but down to the root cause. Join us as your clinicians at the DNA company investigate your DNA and beyond. The intention of this podcast is to enhance your lifestyle by changing what is in your control. This does not substitute the medical advice given by your personal doctor, therapist, and other healthcare professionals.
Hello and good day to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our webinar today, which we are going to be speaking about the carnivore diet. And we are going to look at the potential health benefits, the challenges of adopting a meat-only diet. We'll be talking about the latest research and what expert opinions have about it. We're also going to explore some of how the carnivore diet can impact everything from weight loss to inflammation to gut health. And I have the absolute pleasure of having two celebrity authors, renowned experts in functional genomics, who are not only powerhouses in the biohacking world, but are both co-founders of the DNA company. And I am speaking about Kashif and Dr. Bryce Wylde. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here and, for gracing us with your brilliance and all the information in those big brains of yours.
Listen, Dr. Varden, it would be remiss if I didn't say we are not a team and a collaboration without you and your brilliance and excellence. So thank you so much for moderating and hosting and adding your viewpoints to tonight's segment on the carnivore diet. Looking forward to this. Kashif, really great to be with you again, too.
Yeah, pleasure. It's good for us to all be here. So it's awesome that everyone's coming back to learn more and keep getting closer and closer to their full potential. It's really awesome.
Let's talk a little bit about the carnivore diet. Really, like, what is it? So why don't we get the perspectives? Who wants to go first? How about Dr. Bryce?
Sure. Let me dive right in. Well, when we allude to the concept of diet, first and foremost, really essentially what that really does mean is an exclusion of some or a multitude of other things. And when we think carnivore, of course, we know that Latin word derivative stands for meat. So essentially what we're alluding to here is the meat diet. It wouldn't be exclusive, although you can get, an extension or a level of exclusion of this diet to the point where really all you're eating is red meat. And there's even some fanatics that go to, an uncooked red meat scenario. I don't advise, by the way, none of us advise the DNA company at large, nor its representatives, those you see here today, extending your programs to a diet of any sort, unless you're speaking to your doctor or healthcare provider. And in most cases, when we suggest, I think, the word diet or term, we're suggesting therapeutic intervention using foods for a limited amount of time. That time can vary between prescriptive interventions. So diet really means, that limitation of foods or an exclusion of certain foods, categories of foods to have or impart a therapeutic advantage for a select amount of time, months to years in some cases. In this instance, some of those things that we've seen in the literature, because this is actually quite a new diet, comparatively speaking, to the keto or the vegan or vegetarian or Mediterranean or a number of these other diets, or as we like to refer to them when they're longer lasting, that is to say, maintainable throughout your life based on your genetics, because our DNA 360 report informs the general lifestyle of nutrition that you should follow. But therapeutic interventions will vary, and depending on what needs to be done about those. But this is a relatively new diet, and that's where I was going to get to before handing off to Kashif, is that the keto 70s, vegan, vegetarian, well before that. But this is really maybe only a few decades old or young, if you will. And some people have popularized this more recently. And it's not right for the majority of people. And it can be incredibly right for some individuals who are looking to intervene for things such as, for example, weight loss. Wonderful. You might actually see some incredible results in the front end, maybe not necessarily long-term. It's not for everyone. We'll qualify who it is for. Reduced inflammation. This is the underpinning and sort of, if you will, at the molecular level, the cause of all disease, really, if you think about it. Inflammation, at the DNA company were huge, around that idea is, how do we manage inflammation, whether it's through a detoxification pathway or hormones or methylation, which is loosely translated into predisposition to inflammation, mental clarity. But the biggest one that I see in clinical practice is immune. So autoimmune, this is an incredible diet, usually for the short to medium term, to control immunological discrepancies, autoimmunity, and there's a huge backbone to that. I'd throw it over to you, Cash. What else are you seeing?
Yeah, so it's firstly like, what is the diet? To Dr. Laura's point, it's not just I eat steak. It's also I eat the organs. I eat kidney. I eat liver. I eat heart.
Nose to tail.
You have liver, which is one of the most nutrient foods we know, right? You have selenium, zinc, B12. You have, the list goes on in terms of the benefits. Folate, right? Very bioavailable folate. So it's when you eat the whole animal, including making bone broth and getting collagen and healing your gut, including things like glands and things that we toss out typically, they all have their unique benefit. And it's the one thing you can do where you're doing one thing, but you're getting everything you need. But to Bryce's point, it's not for everybody, for sure. And there are nuances in the report that will tell you that you may not do so well. And I saw somebody, one of the first comments was, I gained 10 pounds. Very likely outcome if you're not genetically wired for it. But you'll also hear from somebody else, I lost 10 pounds very quickly, right? And so the weight issue, I think, is separate from the health issue. I think it's one of the few things left that hasn't been adulterated. If you truly get pasture-raised, organic, grass-fed, grass-finished beef, you can trust that you're eating something clean, which means that in as much as the nutrients from the animal fuel you, you're also removing everything that hurts you, right? So it's one of the few ways you can actually do that with certainty. So that's the health question. But then the weight question is separate, and there's more complexity in terms of gene pathways pointing to whether that's actually going to work for you or not.
Yeah. And there is that crossover for sure.
And putting in my own 2 cents about that, I find that it is something that is more beneficial in a therapeutic time period, doing it for 30 days, 90 days, and then easing back in, because a lot of it I have found has helped with gut healing, with lowering the inflammation. I've had clients who have been on the carnivore diet go back, start bringing in carbohydrates, fruits and vegetables, and their inflammation flares back up. So it's realizing and seeing the benefits. But as you were saying with the comment, I saw that too about gaining 10 pounds, but I would have some more questions. It's what did your carnivore diet look like?
Yeah.
What were your sources? There are other aspects to that I think can play a factor. So this is where having a practitioner or someone to help follow you, because it's not the easiest thing to follow, and there's a lot of nuances to it. When you consider the 3 main principles for a carnivore diet, first of all, and this was mentioned, but just kind of summarizing, that animal organs and meat really are the most nutrient rich foods on the planet. Very dense, nutrient dense. Second thing, that all life forms, including plants, and especially plants, they have evolved defense mechanisms to protect themselves. And, that's where we get into these anti-nutrients coming from plants, of oxalates and lectins and all of these other, aspects that can be problematic. But also for the fact that ultra processed foods, and we're talking vegetable oils, refined carbohydrates, they really have no place at all in the human diet, especially if you want to be healthy.
Well, yeah, but they're so new. We made them, they're synthetic and our bodies don't recognize. In fact, that's where I always go. I go back to evolutionary biology and where we've all come from. And that's, of course, what we stand for at the DNA company, is appreciating that evolutionary. This, of course, depends on where this person's baseline was, because at the end of the day, really, weight loss is sort of an old term we should throw out. And tissue modification and or macronutrient to tissue modification in the human body is kind of more of the technical term I would use to suggest where's the DEXA or the bioimpedance analysis showing that you've translated from your beginning. If you started at 180 pounds and you became 200 pounds, but you gained 25 pounds of lean muscle and lost 15 pounds of fat tissue, whatever that net is, math's clearly not my expertise, sciences, but that net is what we're talking about. So that gain of lean muscle from including a transformative diet, such as therapeutic intervention using this particular diet, is, I think, of qualification. So I don't know that person's history or background, but we have to know where their tissues have transformed. I'd also just sort of quickly suggest there's some comparative diets out there for the majority of people here. They probably know, but the keto diet, and these are both low carb, but the keto includes a wider variety of foods, including some of the low carb vegetables and some dairy. And then the paleo diet, I'm a huge fan of that. That emphasizes obviously whole foods, includes fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds. But I love to think about where did our biology sort of come from and evolve to warrant not just the variations of genetics that we all exude, and some of us differently than others. We got to dive into that. But large primates, we didn't evolve the ability to feed this large brain that we have and a large body simultaneously. And this is what I find most interesting. So primates, if you observe them in the wild, they will eat like 8 to 10 hours a day to be able to accommodate the size of brain that they have, right? Whereas if we ate the same diet as a primate, we'd have to spend over 11 hours, research shows, just literally consuming all day long, feeding in order to accommodate the size of brain that we have. And I'm a little brain centric these days, having written a book on this most recently. But here it is, from an evolutionary perspective and how we can sort of judge some of these diets and their therapeutic interventions, depending on how our genes express. We're going to get there. But from an evolutionary perspective, it isn't just possible to have arrived where we're at today with the brain power that we have if all we did was spend every waking hour feeding. So the question becomes, how do we even get here? And this is a bit of the story that I thought I would introduce here, is that first, evolutionary biology suspects a single mutation in a single bit of DNA. We don't test for this. It's irrelevant. We all have this in a single bit of DNA called RGAP11B, or ARGAP11B. Actually, I'm missing an H in there. RHGAP. Anyway, it's an acronym at RGAP. And this had to occur to allow our brains to grow in size. We know the story, but we got ruga, we got, these different sulcide. It became inverted, not just sort of a smooth cortex, right? And at a certain point, a brain too large wouldn't be feasible to support, even in our cranium. So, and also we'd have to eat 24 hours a day just to support that. It's to no species advantage to grow it disproportionate to the size of the body. So long story short, with an increasing intelligence, this desire evolutionary to walk upright and explore the jungle and savanna, we then discovered fire, right? This is the story of the human species, Homo sapiens. So about 2.5 million years ago, we began to eat meat and marrow, probably fat, even more importantly than the muscle tissue, actually, providing these essential fats and even B9, folate, B12. We test variations for that at the DNA company, which all plays into this story. But then about 50,000 years ago, that's like yesterday, we began to cook. And then simultaneously, these mutations in the FADS2 gene, which encodes for the delta desaturase that, these essential omega-3 fatty acids describe. So this point mutation for RGAP, the ability for us to take these essential fats that really are only found in meats, right, including fish, obviously, and then to cook it is to pre-digest it outside of the body. So cooked food yields far more energy to feed the brain. This frees up all this time to do these more interesting and impressive things than just thinking about and foraging for food. So it started there. And then I guess I'm saying full circle to Kashif's point, and even to yours, Dr. Varden, all these other things 30,000 years ago, we started to cultivate, we started to grow, we started to develop these other oils and these other grains that ultimately just started to go and trigger our immune systems. And what the heck is that? But the one thing that's for sure is we know meat, our bodies. We need it. It's the number one source of fuel in all the organ meats, to Kash's point, nose to tail, that our bodies require for micronutrients, so from macro to micro, to make sure that our bodies run efficiently. So as you can probably tell, I am absolutely not anti-vegan. I think there's an instance where that might fit for some people, and we know those genes also. But the majority of us and where we've come from evolutionary biology, at the very least, even if you don't just go strict carnivore, it's got to be the foundation, grass-fed, of course, and all these other things we'll probably talk about, of a good diet.
Well, and we also can't forget that fish, fish is included in there.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. And before we continue to go on with, carnivore and talking about, different guidelines for a carnivore diet and diving in deeper into that, I'd like to bring up the poll results and go over to see what people are doing. Okay, thank you. So our first question was, do you have a clear understanding of what the carnivore diet is? And actually, we've got just about a half and half split of yes and no. So it looks like a lot of people, have either done their homework or, at least know something about it. And I'm so glad for those of you who don't, that you are here and can learn more. We could always learn more. So our second question, what diet best describes your current eating habits? And it looks like that more than half of you, it's no specific diet, but I am showing, probably around that 15% does keto, carnivore, and we do have 7% plant-based, and then we have almost 15% in other. And I've noticed throughout the chat, I've kind of been looking that we've got Candida diet, we've got gluten-free, different aspects of other eating habits. So let's see, our last question. What interests you in learning about or trying the carnivore diet? And it really looks like the biggest thing is inflammation. And thankfully, that is something that the carnivore diet does tout to help with. And right alongside to autoimmunity, even though our second most interest is for gut health. And of course, we know that gut health and autoimmunity are interweaved. They work right together, and of course, inflammation. And we have about 40% interested in energy and weight loss. And then a little bit further down, we have insulin resistance, diabetes, and then other. So moving along, let's talk about some of the myths when it comes to the carnivore diet. So, Cash, let's have you take this. What myths have you heard and know and can debunk?
So the first thing you typically hear is, I have a cholesterol issue, I can't go carnivore, or is it gonna make me gain fat? Am I gonna have a heart disease? And it's literally the opposite, meaning that the other thing that you find in liver is K2. K2 is what actually helps you get away from the plaque that's building up in your arteries. And anyone here knows that if we talked about vitamin D, we're saying at a high dose, you're also adding K2 to mitigate that plaque. And so here's one big thing that answers a lot of the myths, is that when you look at research, you have to ask the context and what was included. Meaning, if you research the average American diet, which means industrial meat full of steroids, hormones, pesticides, and cows that were fed soy pellets, then the results may be very different than somebody eating pasture-raised grass-fed meat. And so does beef cause cancer? Does beef cause heart disease? Answers that studies prove to be true. What is beef? It's not, there's very different sources, and it is one thing that Bryce mentioned earlier, right? So a lot of the myths get dispelled from understanding sourcing and understanding that the Frankenstein that's in the grocery store may not be what it was supposed to be, right? And there's something a lot more pure and closer to what Mother Nature provides. And so you'll actually find that the same thing that does, in fact, in the studies cause people to get sick can heal the exact same problem it causes, depending on the source. And so this is where a lot of the myths get dispelled. The other big one around the gut, and there's no fiber, and my gut's going to get wrecked. And if you do it properly, yes, certainly the first 2-3 days, if you haven't done anything like it before, you might get constipated. Your gut might feel a little off and heavy. And then all of a sudden, your gut microbiome is going to magically convert itself to exactly what you need. And on day 4 or 5, it's going to feel incredible. And so this myth of like, well, where's the fiber? Where's the plants? Where's the phytonutrients? The cow already ate them and is giving them to you in a form that's bioavailable to you. For example, folate. What is folate? It comes from the word foliage, meaning that this cow is eating all this foliage and converting it into the folate that you need so that you don't need to go eat all those plants which are not digestible by you anyway. Right? The cow has 4 stomachs to break those plants down and convert it into the nutrients you need. You don't, right? And the last thing I always hear, not so much about carnivore, but the opposite, is, well, if I can't do well strictly plant-based, why does a horse eat grass? And if you look at a horse, like that's a majestic animal where you can see every ripple of every muscle, and you would think that grass is enough. If you go deep into the digestive processes of a horse, there's enzymes that we don't have. And you can take a nutrient and turn it into a protein if you have the right enzymes to do that. We don't have those enzymes. So it's not, I put something in and it equals an outcome. I put something in, my body then does some work and converts it to something else, and that's the net outcome. And a lot of those things that a gorilla may do, eating, like Bryce said, 8 hours of leaves per day, there's a step before the leaf feels muscle. There's enzyme activity. And that's one of the things we talk about in the, I don't think it's strictly called out in the genetic report. It requires some interpretation. So anyone here that's in a program, they'll dive deep into that. So in as much as the studies are proven to be true, they are based on things that you shouldn't be eating anyway. And that dispels a lot.
How about you, Bryce? Are there any other myths that you want to bust?
Yeah, well, I'd certainly concur with everything that Kashif said. I also think that perhaps one of the myths that it's inherent to the true, let's call them the advocates, the highest advocates of the carnivore diet, is that humans are meant to eat only meat. That's a myth. In my personal and professional opinion, humans are evolutionarily designed to eat a number of different foods. It's genetically that each of us N of one have ended up with that's going to decide what macronutrient is best. By the way, just quick aside, and then I'll give a couple more myths, but just quick aside. Those macronutrients for which our DNA 360 describes what is the focus best for our health from our diet. A couple things to notice. One, some of the micronutrients found within meat, nose to tail, the Kashif described, is not found very efficiently in anything else. That's first thing, organ meats, etc. Trace minerals that you've never even heard of in vegetables. So second thing is, where there is an essential fatty acid, we talk about that all the time. Most people are depleted for omega-3s. There's also 6, 9, 12s. There's 7s as well, but most of us are deficient in omega-3s. There are essential amino acids, and this is the biggest thing, right? Where carnivore diet satisfies for all of those essential amino acids. No vegan or vegetarian diet could ever. So you'd have to supplement those diets in order to achieve the essential amino acids. But here's the big but. There is nothing such as an essential carbohydrate. And I think this is a pedestal a lot of carnivore diet experts will stand on. Essential oils, essential fats, essential amino acids, but no such thing as an essential carbohydrate. That's because we can make energy from protein and fat sources and don't rely. Our brain loves glucose, but we can survive on ketones. Anyways, come back to that perhaps. The other myth, I suppose, is that everyone's going to see immediate health benefit. So again, it depends on your genes, and it depends on the strictness of which you approach this. And I suppose also, I think the biggest myth of all is that somehow this has already been concluded, like as if scientific evidence is so prolific that that's it. We're saying like the carnivore diet is the thing, and it's just new. Like I said at the top, it's something that we're beginning to sort of qualify for certain genetic predispositions, certain individuals, and it's not for everybody, right? And it doesn't have that huge amount of evidence such that the paleo diet or the Mediterranean diet might have, or for that matter, for specific conditions, the keto diet might have. So it's new. It's a baby.
Something that I have been asked before is, what about vitamin C specifically? I mean, we know how important vitamin C is, to health and not get scurvy, etc. And it's, how can you get your vitamin C on a carnivore diet? And thing is that, yeah, even though you are excluding these plant sources, you can actually get sufficient vitamin C from organs, from organ meat. I mean, believe it or not, you do get that. And there's also a theory that where there's an argument that you don't need as much vitamin C when you decrease your carbohydrate intake, that the high fat, because of the glucose, because of that production, that natural production in the body, the regulation of insulin, and because glucose and vitamin C compete for absorption and transportation in the body, it is suggested that without the presence of glucose from carbohydrates, you don't need as much vitamin C. I mean, again, this is a theory, but it does hold some backing for that. Also, with the absence of the anti-nutrients, like I had mentioned before, the phytates, the oxalates, lectins, that it actually provides better bioavailability, mouth words here, including vitamin C. So the vitamin C that is in organ meat is better absorbed and therefore better utilized. And vitamin C is one of the nutrients, micronutrients that we look at genetically in your reports to see how well are you, transporting and working through there. So we can also look at, genetically speaking, how well you're doing, and then can assess from that as well how well a carnivore diet or some of these other diets would work. So let's hop over, and how would one get into a carnivore diet? I mean, I've seen some questions in the chat mentioning about people who are on it, some of the issues that they've been having, or people who are interested. It's like, where do I begin? Maybe we could offer some guidelines that can be helpful. And I do want to mention, Kashif had said that, maybe in the beginning you could get constipated. I actually have had clients who within the first few days actually got diarrhea, but then sticking with it and, and it evened out, because you are making that change to the microbiome, and that is a huge thing. So yes, you could be on either end of the spectrum, and yes, some of these things happen, but it doesn't mean that you stop, within the first week, as your body is changing. But let's talk about some guidelines on how people could incorporate a carnivore diet into their lifestyle, therapeutically, or just trying it out.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't mind eating steak, if you're not vegan, etc. But it's the organs is where people get stuck. And a simple hack to make sure you're getting them in is get a butcher to ground them into your ground meat. So get your ground meat and 30% liver, heart, kidney, and then make burger patties. Your kids won't even know it's there, right? Clean in the beginning. It is meat, organs, butter, salt, maybe some ghee, and that's it, right? And you may need some electrolytes in the beginning as you're resetting the first few days, or you may not. Keep it clean. And what we're finding is the longer people are on it, so there are some potential negatives, and it's like high acid environment. There's a draw on your calcium stores if you're like strict carnivore for too long. So this is where you're finding more and more of the big, the people that have been talking about it so much, like Paul Saladino, guys like that. They're now shifting the total plate a little bit, and you're starting to see fruit, and you're starting to see a little bit of dairy, and you're starting to see honey, right? And so there's some phytonutrients coming in from the fruit, and there's some fibers, but I think of it as a metabolic reset. We are starting very strict, and then you're easing in a little later. So you're using it as a tool for all of the things that were said in the poll: inflammation, gut reset, hormone reset, headaches, all of that stuff. It's all going to get better. In fact, gut and inflammation are probably and autoimmunity, like Bryce was talking about, those are the big ones. So those will get resolved. And when you're metabolically healthy, which is you're trying to get out of metabolic dysfunction, you don't need to be as strict anymore. I can tell you that Bryce and I were at this biohacking conference about 2 years ago, and I think everyone here knows who Dr. Mercola is, right? So Dr. Mercola was backstage, and he was like elated and so excited. I was like, "What's going on here?" And he was eating a bowl of potatoes, and I was like, "Why are you so excited about these potatoes?" He said, "I just figured it out. I don't need to be no or low carb. I need to be metabolically healthy." And he just realized that he was at the stage now where he could shift gears and eat what he wanted and once in a while cheat on his diet and he would be okay. Right. And you'll find that the same bowl of potatoes that today makes you need to take a nap doesn't when you're metabolically healthy. Just like if you bring the toxic load down or you adjust your hormones or you get hydrated, or you get the right nutrients in, 1 or 2 days of problems isn't going to hurt you. But if you're teetering on the line of the threshold, then a little nudge will make you feel sick. So know that also, that this fear that people have of like, I'm never eating anything other than a steak again, you can incorporate things after the metabolic reset is done, but start strict and then ease it in after.
So, Bryce, what types of things would you have people follow to find success on a carnivore diet?
So this, to me, I think to all of us here, comes back to nutrigenomics, the understanding of the genetic basis of diet, which, let's call it again for vernacular, all intents and purposes, the nutritional underpinning for which your genes are calling out for, right? Especially as it relates to macros. Because there is that time and place, I guess, for everything. And we've come from this evolutionary perspective where we have best identified, our immune systems and our digestive systems have best identified with meats and organ meats and berries and some select nuts and seeds, and the paleo concept, eat like our ancestors ate. But the basics of nutrigenomics is you can't change your genes, but you can manage genetic expression through diet, nutrition, and in some instances, therapeutic intervention with supplementation. But the relevance to personalized nutrition is where we're all going, right? N of one, what's my DNA telling me? So the starting point for me is always the DNA 360 test. If you don't have one, these are key genes involved in macronutrient metabolism. And of course, the role of genetic, tailoring of these nutritional plans, whether they're intervention and to Kashif's point, and even yours, it's pushing the big red reset button in most instances, right? Is how I view the carnivore diet. But the genes that influence protein metabolism, so the AMY1 that we look at, the FTO, the ApoA2, how these genetic variations affect protein digestion and utilization. I think that's key to identify these ideal protein sources for these different genetic profiles. And of course, genes and fat metabolism, right? On the carnivore diet, this is key. So what's your ApoE gene looking like, and the impact of genetic variations on like fat absorption, storage, how you utilize things, transport them in the body, your methylation pathway. I mean, do you need much more support there? Your carbohydrate tolerance, by the way. So a lot of these genetic variabilities that suggest macronutrient favorability, right? Does my body favor metabolic, favorability towards macros that are primarily meat? Or am I okay with a carbohydrate, heavy or heavier diet? And that's the TCF7L2 to some degree. And we kind of talked about the SLC gene. So I think we have to understand from first and foremost this genetic profiling, get the macros right. And by the way, this big change, this huge story around protein and the idea that protein needs to be, 0.5, grams per kilogram. Otherwise, there's kidney disease. I mean, we flipped the switch on that now too. We're looking at, 1.5 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. And that's hard, almost impossible to achieve in sort of a more plant-based diet. We really do need, whether again, we're going all the way carnivore, but we really do need clean meats and organ meats in our diet to satisfy the majority of our genes. Another one, for example, micronutrients, BCMO gene. BCMO1, the vitamin A conversion from beta carotene into active vitamin A, you can't do that. That's kind of like we talked about. To your point, Dr. Varden, is, you get maybe low on vitamin C, although when you don't need as much to protect against the oxidative stress, perhaps from some of these phytonutrients, and phytochemicals and so forth, although there are a lot in there that are good, you don't need the amount of vitamin C. But to flip that, in a plant-based diet, you're not getting retinol, the active form of vitamin A. So I guess, again, kind of goes without saying, the fact that we're all, huge advocates of DNA testing here, that know that first before you move on to the macros that are going to carry you into the long term to add years on your life.
Yeah, and I would even add to that, when you get into the behavioral aspects of food and eating, the FTO gene, fat mass and obesity gene, are you dysregulated to where you are having delayed communication from your gut telling your brain, I'm full? When you are eating meats and fats, those are much more satiating. You have that cue signal much more apparent, where you're not, having such a delayed effect and feeling like you're still hungry for more. And, when you get into like the MC4R gene, that hunger cues and snacking and everything else, when your body is satiated, when you, are focused on making sure that you have those nutrients, which you would be getting with more of a meat, protein heavy diet, your body is getting the nutrients it needs, and you're less likely to lean into that hunger, snacking, wanting to constantly feel like you need more fulfillment from it. And especially with, higher salt content, giving your body the electrolytes that it needs can be, very liberating in that fact of being given the energy that your body needs. So a couple other things that I would actually include is hydration. When you are doing this, and if you do plan on adding any type of or leaning into the carnivore diet, you've got to remain hydrated. Very, very important, especially because a lot of times with these meats and with the way that you're cooking, if you are adding salt, you don't want such super high concentrations, and through dilution, through hydrating is very helpful. Not to mention it helps with stools and transit time, which is one of our favorite topics around here. And another aspect would be movement, walking, exercise, making sure that you are moving your body. These are foundational things, honestly, no matter what diet or how you are eating. Those two major components that we don't think about when we think of a particular diet. So we're talking hydration and movement, but these are absolutely critical for a healthy body. So I don't want to ever miss those foundational aspects, but always, anytime that you are moving into any type of therapeutic diet, any type of extremes in your eating habits or anything else, please make sure that you consult with a, healthcare professional, that you are monitoring, your labs, that, you pay attention to that, because we certainly wouldn't want you to dive into areas that could, be problematic for you.
Absolutely.
So Dr. Bryce, any last words?
I would just say thank you very much for your incredible insights and prowess in this space. And it's amazing working side by side you. So thank you for allowing me to join the conversation this evening. But, I think that the precision program that our CEO alluded to a little earlier is something that, whether you have your DNA tests done so far or not, think about, get involved. There's an opportunity for everyone here. I often send, challenging patients that need a little more hand holding through our programs with incredible success, transformative. So whether you're wondering what the best diet is, the best supplement protocol, best detox, the best, immune system regulation, weight loss protocol, I think our team of health experts and clinicians, including yourself, Dr. Varden, of course, are amazing. And I think folks here should really consider reaching out about the precision program. And thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a fantastic rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Take care.
All the best.